First up this afternoon, we have Dr. William Kennedy and his son Ben. Their presentation about workplace violence can hopefully help us reverse astonishing statistics like healthcare professionals being 4 times more likely to face workplace violence, or that healthcare professionals accounted for 1.5 million workplace assaults. This presentation can help you learn how to keep yourself and your staff safe. Dr. Kennedy and Ben, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you guys for having us.
Thanks. So, I know you guys just came back from lunch, which is the best time for doing presentations. So just take a second and get in touch with that part of you, whatever it was that decided to do this workshop and not do something else with this time. And just kind of let yourself think about that part for a second. We're here to talk about workplace violence and healthcare professionals. So I'm Dr. Bill Kennedy. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also a martial arts instructor. Do a lot of martial arts with Japanese sounding names that sound really, really funny, so I won't even go into all of them. But what I really want to talk about to start off with is a really, really important day in my life. It was June 10th of '95. I remember it really clearly. It was a Saturday. And on that day, I graduated with my doctorate in clinical psychology. And our daughter Mackenzie, our oldest child, was born. And my mom was beaten to death in Cincinnati, beaten and stabbed to death. See, the neighbors had a dog, and the dog got into my mom's yard. My mom went and confronted the neighbor. The neighbor followed her when she was going to the store, and the neighbor and her 11-year-old son kicked her, beat her, and stabbed her with broken bottles to death. I've worked in prisons. I do custody evaluations. I do not guilty by reason of insanity evaluations. I do sex offender treatment. Every bit of my focus has been on violence and protection and keeping people safe. Matter of fact, the only area that I haven't had any real experience in is dealing with mass casualty shootings. Today, my assistant, Ben, is going to tell you a little bit about himself, and then we're going to talk to you a little bit about healthcare profession and self-protection and some things that you can keep in mind as you're working in that field. Ben?
Hey there, everybody. My name is Benjamin Kennedy. I am a martial artist and a self-defense instructor, as well as a social media influencer. Just recently, we reached 550,000 followers on TikTok, and one of my recent videos 4 days ago, if you were to watch it every second of every day for 3 years, you would have watched it as much as it's been watched in 4 days. So, we've been doing a lot of good work, and you know that type of violence that he said he hasn't dealt with? In 2019, in Dayton, Ohio, in front of Ned Pepper's, there was a mass shooting at 1:30 a.m. I happen to be one of the survivors from that shooting. Now, luckily, my friends and I left with no more holes and no less blood than we got there with. But between all of the violence that he's had to deal with and the violence that I've got to deal with, we've seen just about every single aspect of violence that you can imagine. I don't want that for anybody. So just as important as this is to him on the healthcare side of things, this is important to me, both as someone who's dealt with mass shooting violence and someone who's dealt with watching a parent go through a job that subjects him to some violent altercations at least every couple of months.
So ikigai is a Japanese concept, and it is kind of the intersection of what you love, what the world needs, what you can get paid for doing, and what you're good at. Our ikigai is helping people stay safe.
Sure is.
I mean, I wake up thinking about doing this kind of stuff. I honestly do. Like, I love my job. I love being a psychologist. I really, really enjoy doing this. I really, really enjoy helping people be safe. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not an expert. Experts have all the answers, and I do not have all the answers. What I do is I really, really have a lot of questions, and I think between us we can figure out some answers to them.
That sounds nice.
So if you decide to get some self-protection training someplace, your agency decides to get it, you decide you want to get it yourself, I don't care what type of self-protection you get, there are a few things that any kind of self-protection needs to offer you. If they don't give you these things, you really aren't getting your money's worth, you're really not getting what you need to be safe. So what are some of the things that we need from self-protection training?
Doc, that's a wonderful question. A couple of things that your self-protection training needs to cover. First off, it needs to cover the legal and ethical side of things. What am I allowed to do in the eyes of the law, and what does my code of conducts allow me to do? Second thing, I need to be able to cover violence dynamics. I need to know what violence looks like. It's not just this one solid object. It's got many facets, many gears to it, and I need to know what type of violence I'm dealing with at the time, because the way that I handle one type of violence may make the other one worse. I need to learn how to avoid a bad situation. If I can't avoid it, I need to learn how to escape that situation. Well, if I can't escape it, then I need to learn how to de-escalate that situation. I need to learn how to break a freeze. Most vertebrates, when they experience unexpected violence, end up doing something called freezing. The problem is, when you freeze, that is based on predators from a long, long time ago that hunted us very, very often, that had sight based on movement. But when it comes to human interaction, if he holds stock still,
He can't see me now.
no, I totally can.
You can't see me. I'm
No,
not
I can
moving.
still see him. I
I'm
don't know
not
if you
moving.
guys
He
can-
can't
I can
see
totally
me.
still
You
see
can't.
him.
Now you can't.
No, that's
You cannot see me.
object permanence,
He
kids. We're
can see
working
me.
on it.
Okay.
So, we need to work on our freezes. We need to work on counter ambush. When a violent altercation happens, it's usually unexpected, and you get ambushed. So being able to take that ambush that's happening to me and turn it into something that I can work through until I can get away and get to safety is extremely important. I need to work on the physical side of things itself, because let's be honest, if most of you are pretty solid, well-rounded humans, you probably don't go out of your way to just start hitting random people. Physical altercations, physical self-protection work is some of the stuff that we have the least amount of practice with, so it's pretty important to work on. We also need to work on the aftermath of situations. Something that not a lot of people talk about in some self-defense situations are we don't talk about the things that happen after you have to use violence, after you have to use physical force. What does that look like for you afterward, and how do we cope with that to move forward to some semblance of normality? So with that, why should this matter to us?
That's a real good question. So the reason this should matter to you as a healthcare professional is you need to know what kind of situations you like to experience. So there are 4 types of workplace violence, cleverly named type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. Like, who knew the government could come up with a straightforward labeling?
It's very creative.
It is creative. So type 1 workplace violence, that's where violence happens and is just a bad place to be and is a good place for violence to happen. Think about places being robbed, like a bank or a store. It is a place where the person doing the violence doesn't have any connection to that place. They are just doing it because that is a good place for things to happen. Type 2 is where the person has a connection to that place. This is a customer, this is an employee, this is a patient. And that person is using violence in that area that they're connected to. Type 3 is the type of workplace violence that people tend to think of when they say workplace violence. That is where that person is an employee and they're displaying violence in that workplace. Type 4 workplace violence is where the person who's being victimized has a connection to that workplace. The person doing the violence doesn't. So think an estranged spouse who comes onto the work site. Think, we got into an altercation at a traffic light. I drove onto work and he followed me onto the premises.
Because I wasn't quite done being mad at him yet, and he needed to know just how furious I was.
So those are workplace violence types. Some things you need to know about violence, though, is, and you don't need to read all the names on here, just let me tell you that the things that are blue are healthcare professions, and the things that are green are any industry other than healthcare profession. And that's kind of the breakdown of people getting hurt at work. There's the different ways that they get hurt in the different places. Where it gets really interesting is this is when you get hurt and it's another person that caused you to get hurt. This is human-related violence in the workplace. And again, the ones that are blue are healthcare professions. The ones that are green are all the other professions, all other industries, education, construction, retail. If you see the ones that are blue, those are the ones where healthcare professionals work. Put a little bit finer point on this. If I'm in construction, about 10% of the incidents that I get where someone is injured have to do with another person causing that injury. If I'm in retail, it's 1%. Across all industries, it's about 2% of the injuries happen because someone else physically assaulted somebody. Transportation, which is one that people tend to think of a lot, bus driver, Uber driver, that accounts for about 6%. Healthcare industries across the board, about 10%, 1 in 10 times that you get injured if you're a healthcare professional, it will be done by another person attempting to harm you. If you're working in a hospital, that's 10% also. If you happen to be in nursing, residential care, you're a home health care aide, it's up to 13%. If you work in other residential facilities, 28% of the violence is going to be caused, 28% of the injuries, it's going to be caused by another person. Now, these are the injuries that cause you to take at least 1 day off of work. So we're not talking about a bump or a bruise. These are injuries where it actually affects somebody's life. If you work in a psychiatric hospital, substance abuse hospital unit, 43% of the times you get injured at work will be another person doing it with intention. And if you're in private practice as a psychologist, as a mental health professional, 51% of the injuries you experience in the workplace happen as the result of a person intentionally trying to hurt you. I am more likely to get assaulted by one of my clients than I am to slip on ice in December going off out of my office. That's why you need to know about this. So, Ben, what gets in the way of people keeping themselves safe?
Doc, you are throwing amazing questions my way. So one of the first things that we have to talk about in terms of what gets in the way when people try to keep themselves safe is if you're a good person, just like we talked about before, or at least your friends would say you're a good person, it's hard to hurt others. Humans hurting other humans is pretty difficult. There's a reason that we have to train people how to hurt other humans. It doesn't come inherently to us, especially not to the point where you would actually do damage to another human. Second thing that we need to worry about is that freeze. When I lock up, we have our freeze, flee, fight response, otherwise known as our fight or flight. First thing that happens as a vertebrate that would be experiencing unexpected violence is I freeze, and we talked about that before. So in order to work through that freeze, there's a lot of work that we have to do, and it definitely gets in the way of keeping yourself safe. The next thing is a really silly one that you wouldn't think about often, but it's I need a plan. When people say these silly things while they're actually getting hurt, they will continue to tell themselves over and over again, I need a plan, I need a plan, I need a plan. The problem is you don't need a plan when you are being hurt, you need to act. The plan is for before that violent altercation happens. Last but not least is something called an OODA loop, which I'm sure sounds like an amazing cereal, but it's not. I'm so sorry, I've looked. So OODA loop stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. This is how most people handle unexpected situations or really just go about their day-to-day. I observe that something's happening, I orient to it, I decide what I'm going to do about it, and then I act. The problem is when you get that OODA loop, you get stuck between observe and orient. So for example, I see something in my periphery that's getting bigger and closer. I orient to it and I go, oh, it's a fist and it's gonna hit me. And then, boom, I get hit. Well, then I observe, oh, there's another thing coming closer to me. Oh, it's a fist, it's gonna hit, boom. And I get stuck in that observe, orient over and over again, and I never actually decide what to do about it and act, which can get people hurt very badly.
So there's some other things that we need to pay attention to though. Healthcare professionals are especially bad at keeping themselves safe.
What do you mean?
Well, there's some things that healthcare professionals train, thank you Hippocrates, that I take that Hippocratic oath and I'm supposed to keep people safe. If you ask a police officer, hey, do you think you're gonna have to use physical violence today? Most of them are gonna tell you, yeah, I mean, that's a possibility. If you ask a counselor, hey, along with your clipboard and your Beck depression inventory, did you plan on punching somebody? Most of them will say no. It violates our expectation. As a profession, most people get into healthcare because they want to help people, not because they want to be a cage fighter. So it goes against what we think we're supposed to do as healthcare professionals. If you're an administrator listening to this, kind of plug your ears right now. I'm going to be talking about you.
He means it. Do it.
You should, really. Healthcare and administration are risk averse. You know what I mean?
That's a bold claim.
That is a bold claim. The risk averse, what that means is I don't want to get sued if I'm a healthcare professional, if I'm an administrator. So who is more likely to sue you? The patient or the nurse? Well, statistically, it is a no-brainer. It is the nurse that is going to not sue you. It is the patient that is going to sue you. So administration knows that. So policies are put in place, have been put in place to really focus on the patient, which is important, but to not focus on the danger that the healthcare professional faces. So they are risk averse and they don't necessarily focus on training. I know how ironic it is to say this as a virtual presentation, but I've seen self-protection trainings that were done exclusively virtually, where the people were supposed to learn how to keep themselves safe in a completely virtual environment. And while I can give you information in a virtual environment, I can't train you in a virtual environment. So that was so that someone could check off a box to say that they had that kind of training. Another thing that runs in the way of us staying safe as healthcare professionals is the view that this is just a part of the job. You really see this in nursing. You really see this in places like EMS. That's just what you do. If you're a home health care aide, yeah, a patient's going to spit on me, a patient's going to punch me, a patient's going to yell at me and scratch me, but that's a part of the job. That's really been the nomenclature, and it starts in the schools of nursing, and it is carried all the way up through the businesses that you should just expect to get assaulted at work. That's just what happens. If you receive self-protection training, one thing that they don't take into account is there's a difference between aggressive behavior, between destructive behavior, and between assaultive behavior. Those are three different categories. And most management of aggressive behavior, MOAB training, only focuses on the aggressive behavior. Aggressive behavior is that yelling, screaming, in-your-face person that could go off. It's the person who threatens to talk to your manager. That's the aggressive behavior. If I punch that person, that is not a good life choice if I enjoy my career. Destructive behavior is where I'm injuring somebody or being injured, but that's not my intention. My intention is to be safe. My intention is they're a threat, whatever it is, but that is destructive. Destructive can be towards themselves. You have somebody who has a can, and they have the lid to a can, and they're trying to cut their own wrist with it. That's destructive behavior. Assaultive behavior is where the person is intentionally trying to harm you. And so if you don't know the difference between those things in your training, you're going to run into some problems. So if they don't know the different kinds of violence,
Right.
and they don't know if there are different kinds of violence,
Of course.
how are they going to keep themselves safe?
That is a fantastic question.
So if you look at the research, most of the research focuses on two kinds of violence. But every time you look at it, there's an asterisk. There's a statement that says, and some other people do, and some other people do. And when we were looking at it, there were enough asterisks. They were like, maybe this is different.
Enough discrepancies that maybe there was something new to look into. Absolutely.
So we needed to develop a different model that really accounted for those asterisks, those alsos, and we really, I think we hit upon something when we looked at a global unified model of violence. It's something that takes all the different kinds of violence and it looks at animal studies. So we're looking just straight biology. It looks at social science. It looks at healthcare industries. It looks at police, and it takes all those different together and it puts them into some, I think, much better categories that helps make a lot more sense when we're talking about violence.
Absolutely.
So, Ben, what are some of those types of violence?
I would love to go through some of that. So the first type of violence, which was already commonly held, was affective. Affective violence is about keeping myself safe from a perceived threat. This is about the fear of something coming to hurt me, whether that is a physical thing or that is an intangible thing. Things like someone attacking my manhood. Let's say if you've ever seen a young male from the age of, I don't know, 5 to an older gentleman to the age of 76. You've probably seen this before. This is someone sitting at a bar, minding my own business, and he comes up to me because...
I think he's staring at me. What are you looking at?
Oh, and I sit here and I go, well, he's attacking me. What? I wasn't looking at anything. Well, now I am. I wasn't looking at anything except for your ugly face.
He just insulted me. I'm not taking that. Who are you calling ugly?
I said your ugly face.
Oh, he just touched me. I know self-defense, well, that's an assault.
Absolutely.
I think you're ugly.
And I bet you guys can imagine where this goes to next. The problem is, when we handle stuff like this, carry on through, right? Oh, we'll go ahead and handle that in the next part.
Yep.
Next slide. Thank you, good sir. I've got a lovely man working on the slides for me. Thank you. Again, this is about the avoidance of that. Some of the emotions that track with that are fear, anger, irritation, frustration, and that all makes sense and is pretty clear in stuff like this. This can also be about the person who is having a PTSD flashback, and you register to them as someone who is a danger or a threat. This is, he's walking toward me to help me. He's a therapist, but I'm going, get away from me, stop, leave me alone. And he starts getting too close, and that's when I lash out. It's not about him being a bad person. This can very well just be about me being afraid of something that's about to happen to me.
So if I kind of look at this, and I look at how it actually happens, there's some mechanisms in the body that actually explain this. And for you medical professionals out there, if I say something off, please forgive me, I'm a lowly psychologist, I am not a physician. But we're looking at stress hormones, we're looking at flight, fight, or fight responses. So cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline are what we're talking about here. Those are the stress hormones that produce that flight or fight response, that sympathetic nervous system arousal. Those are the things that cause me to feel geared up. We have brain structures that account for this. The amygdala, which apparently some old Greek guys.
It's usually the old Greek guys.
It was old Greek, because they were guys back then.
Of course.
They thought that looked like an almond. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't ask questions.
But anyhow, they thought it looked like an almond. So that amygdala perceives a threat. The information comes in through your thalamus. The amygdala perceives a threat. It sends that alarm to the rest of the system. And my body starts to change when I perceive that threat. My heart rate increases. My pupils dilate, because seeing that I'm getting ready to get hit by a branch or fall off of a cliff apparently is really adaptive.
Yeah, no, that's pretty important.
So my
That keeps us
pupils
alive.
dilate, heart rate decreases. My blood flow redirects, it goes away from my extremities, it goes into my large muscle groups, my upper arms, my upper legs, my chest, my back, because it attaches to my pinky, and I've had it over 50 years. I want to keep it. If it's lose my pinky or lose my life, it's got to go.
Of course.
Plus, pinkies don't fight tigers. It's not going to like poke it in the eye or something like that.
Depends. Depends on the day.
My digestion turns off, because your large intestine plus your small intestine is somewhere around 25 feet, I believe. Whole lot of blood tied up in digesting food. So my brain says, hey, Bill, dump the steak or turn it into a steak, buddy, your choice. That's why we get kind of sick to our stomach, nauseous, queasy when we perceive a threat. All of those mechanisms are in place to keep you safe if you perceive something as a threat. That's how affective violence works. So what can we do if someone is displaying affective violence?
Let's go back to some of those scenarios that we just played through for a moment. Let's start with the monkey dance, if you will. Sure. So I'm standing here minding my own business. I'm staring off into the distance, and he thinks that I'm staring at him.
He's staring at me. What are you looking at?
Nothing, man. I'm so sorry. It's just been a long day. It's totally my bad. Can I buy you a drink?
Yeah, fine. Whatever.
What I'm doing here is I am showing him that I am not the threat that he perceives me to be. Whatever the threat is that he is worried about, one of the best ways for me to de-escalate affective violence is to prove that I'm not that thing. Let's go back to our medical example, right? I am currently cowering away from him because PTSD flashbacks and I need him to not get near me. Stop! Leave me alone!
It's okay. I'm going to slow down how fast I'm talking. I'm going to watch my rate of voice, my rate of speech, my pitch. I'm going to lower my pitch, my volume. I'm going to drop my volume, and I'm going to move really slow. I'm only going to speak in maybe 3 or 4 word sentences because his frontal lobe, that part that's in charge of judgment, reasoning, problem solving, all those great things, it goes offline when that arousal goes up. Is it okay if I come a little closer?
I feel really crowded right now. I just need a minute, okay? I just need a minute.
Now, right now I'm thinking, make my shoulders small. I'm a big guy, relatively big guy. I'm gonna make my shoulders small. I'm gonna kind of make myself smaller. I'm letting him know I'm not trying to hurt you. I want to do some camouflage. I want to make him think I'm something different. He thinks I'm something gonna hurt him. I'm going to let him see me in a different light.
Of course.
My hands are up where he can see them. And I'm asking, not touching, not telling. You will see people do this. Don't do this. Don't touch. Talk. Ask.
Absolutely. And again, this is just a minor rubric for what we're looking at. The strategy stays the same, which is I have to prove to them that I'm not a threat. So that's just one type of violence. And you said we've got 3.
I think we've got 3 kinds of violence. So
okay.
what's another kind of violence?
Another type of violence is called predatory violence. For us, in our GUMV, predatory violence is the neutral acquisition of assets. This is, hey, I need in the building. Do you mind coming with me to help me get in?
Yeah, sure.
I lost, absolutely, absolutely. And this is me taking him to get something that I need. Now, when we say neutral acquisition of assets, we mean that. It's not about whether I like him or don't like him. It's not about him as a person. It's about the things that I need from him. I am trying to get things, and violence just happens to be the best way to do it. Now, what you don't see on camera is after that, this is where I take him into a back alley and I jump him for keys, wallet, money, ID card to get in, something like that. Because, again, I just need what's inside. I need the goods or I need him. But it's not about how I feel about him. This is also the, hey, excuse me, do you have the time?
Yeah.
And me trying to run off with his watch. Same thing.
This is also when someone wants your prescription pad.
Absolutely.
This is also when you work the front desk at the crisis clinic and they think that people pay with actual money. All of those fit into this kind, I think.
Of course, absolutely. So here's what that goes to. I believe this is something called cold violence, correct? So when we talk about this being neutral or cold, again, that really just plays into and moves into the fact that this is not about an emotional arousal state. As a matter of fact, what's happening for this biologically?
So biologically for this, the main neurotransmitters involved are dopamine. Now we know dopamine is the reward center in the brain. It is the, it is the center that hits when he's playing a video game, because when he plays a video game and he gets to the next level, he doesn't go, oh, he goes like, yes. That reward, that yes feeling, that's dopamine. And in that neutral acquisition, it's not really big. It's not this huge spike. It is after I get that thing that I was trying to get, I feel better.
Much more about a job well done.
It is a job well done.
Than enjoying the process of doing it.
Very much so. Mechanisms in the brain, this is going to be frontal lobe, I think, when it's predatory violence. I plan when it's predatory violence. When they talk about something being premeditated, it's predatory violence. Anytime I can actually have a plan and I'm using violence, that's what this is. Now, it can be just as aggressive as affective.
Of course.
It is not that it is less aggressive. It is that the person knows what they're doing when they're doing it. They do not have a fight or flight response going on in their body.
Of course.
So what do we need to do to decrease predatory violence?
Just like in affective violence, let's go back to some of those scenarios, shall we?
Sounds good.
Right. So the first one is, hey, excuse me, I need help getting into the building. Do you have something that I can use?
Yeah, wait a second.
What he's going to do right now is increase the cost. Remember, since this is predatory violence, I am doing a cost-benefit analysis. It's going to cost me some energy, some time, a couple of things in order to get what I want from him. But I'm counting on the reward being much more than the cost. What he just did there by sweeping and clearing, even though he's not actually carrying right now, this makes it so that I go, ooh, do I really want to do this? Makes me second guess. In that same vein, we've got the next one, which is increasing uncertainty. So if I'm saying, hey, excuse me, do you have the time?
Yeah, hang on one second. They got these new cameras in. And
New cameras.
new cameras. Did you see? Oh, you know what? The new cameras that we just got set in place, I think they're working okay. So you wanted to know what time it is?
What he's just done is he's told me that this job is not going to be as easy as I thought it was. And now I have to start thinking about same thing as the cost, but a little bit different. This increases my uncertainty, and I have to think about, am I going to be able to do this and get away with it? Or should I pick a different target?
So those two types of violence are the ones that you see in the animal research, those are the ones that you see. The problem with animal research, though, is we can't really ask the mouse how it feels. I tried, I'm a psychologist, I don't speak mouse. How does that make you feel doesn't translate really well into mouse speak.
Tragic thing, I'm sure they have a lot to say.
I'm sure they do, it'd be a good mission field. So one of the things that happens is that asterisk that keeps happening, that's a different type of violence. And it doesn't get picked up in the animal studies because you can't really measure that motive. So what's that other kind of violence?
That third type of violence that we're going to talk about today is actually dopaminergic. Just like dopamine, this is about enjoying the process. When I do violence with a dopaminergic feel behind it, when I do something with a dopaminergic goal behind it, it's to enjoy what I'm doing. The violence that I'm enacting is because I enjoy the violence aspect. I'm doing this to get fun out of what I'm doing.
Oh.
Yeah, which is a little scary. I can get excited, I can have pleasure from this. Some things like duper's delight, where I get that little smile when I pull one over on somebody. Again, dopaminergic violence is violence for the sake of violence, and I enjoy what I'm doing.
In terms of the mechanism for this, it's dopamine still, but this is a different feel. This is a different drive. This is the anticipatory reward. This is you are mowing the lawn. You're exhausted, you're tired, you're hot, and you look at the front door and someone comes out the door with a really, really big glass of iced tea. Feel that? That feeling you got just when you saw it and you're like, oh. That feeling is the dopaminergic part of anticipatory reward. So in this set, instead of it being, I got my reward, okay, it's, I'm looking forward to this reward. It's, I can't wait for this. It's, I like that feeling that I'm gonna get when I do that thing. It is still gonna be based in the brain in the same places, but it is really about that anticipated feeling rather than the feeling that you get after you get that reward. So, how do you deal with dopaminergic violence?
That is a great question, and something that we had to think about for a while, because as we realize that there's this other type of violence that's happening, what comes with that is a whole nother way of trying to figure out how to de-escalate it properly. Here's what that looks like. Now, I know you're dad, so you probably got about 30 of them on tap.
Okay.
I want you to think of a knock-knock joke.
Got one.
That was way too fast.
I'm a dad.
I don't
I
like
do
it.
knock-knock jokes. I do dad jokes.
I so
I've
don't
got
like
dad. I've got lots of dad jokes.
It's awful.
They're
All right,
good. They're good.
fire away.
Okay, ready? Knock knock.
Come in.
Oh.
I just took all of the fun out of that joke for him. And the same basic thing is going to happen with dopaminergic violence. What I'm doing is I am depriving them of the reward that they perceive that they're going to get. If we go back to that same bar scenario, which is a really good one for this, right? And he's decided that he's going to pick a fight, not because he thinks I'm challenging his manhood, but because he thinks it's going to be fun to beat me up, and I handle it a little bit differently, we can de-escalate that dopaminergic violence. Doc?
Hey guys, watch this. Watch this. I'm gonna get him. What are you looking at? Hold on, don't. Just stop. Just stop. Stop. Jeez. Jeez.
Does anybody want to beat up someone that is crying directly in front of them for clout? Doesn't work super well.
No.
Also, makes you look like a jerk.
Now, what's really important here is I can recognize the difference between those kinds of violence. Because if I think this is affective violence, he's afraid of me. And what it actually is he really enjoys hurting me. What I do to make one of those better will actually end up making the other one worse.
Of course.
So this really kind of takes us into what we started doing to help people stay safe.
Yeah, it does. What does that look like?
Well, I said I'm a psychologist, I'm a martial arts instructor. I work with the police department. I'm a hostage negotiator. I play a lot of fun games. And when you look at self-protection training, it seems to come out of one of two camps. You either have the martial arts, you disarm somebody, come at Ben, and he disarms me, and he hits 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 me, and he does all these things, because martial art is war art. Martial arts are derived from combat on a battlefield. And in a battlefield, he gets to keep hitting me until I am on the ground.
Alivent.
Alivent. That's a good word. I like that word.
A great
Alivent. So it comes out of martial arts, or it comes out of law enforcement.
Where my job is to detain them.
The other avenue comes out of mental health. How did that make you feel? I need to talk you down. One of those has to do with affective violence. One of them has to do more with predatory violence. But they never mix those together. So as we started looking at it, we were like, we don't really need to take this model that's not really designed for these situations and shoehorn it in so that it'll work for these other situations. So we really developed a model made by healthcare professionals to help healthcare professionals in the situations that healthcare professionals are in. So really to do that, we had to really decide, like, what do we want to happen? Like what's a win if I'm trying to keep myself safe?
Yeah, and we sat there and we talked about it for a little while, and we came up with a couple of criteria. So our win that we try and teach our people when we're working through stuff like this is, first and foremost and most importantly, I make it out alive. That has to be number one. The same way that when you're on an airplane and if you're going down, they tell you to put the mask on yourself first before you help other people, you are no use to anyone if you're not able to help them. So you have to keep yourself safe first. Second, I need to be able to keep others safe. That is second place to keeping myself safe. This is whether I'm keeping the patients I'm in charge of safe, or my friends and family safe, or my fellow coworkers safe. Third importance, I need to work on making sure that I don't go to jail or prison for what I've done, because that's really not super great and we don't want that. Again, not as important as making sure you get out alive, and not as important as making sure that friends and family are alive, but it's still definitely up there. And fourth, I need to make sure that I don't lose the civil case or the lawsuit for what I did. All training should help you to do these four things, and through the ADAPT model, hopefully we can do that.
So that's a win.
Absolutely,
So
that is a win.
What kind of things do you do in order to make a win?
Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. So here are some of the things that I do to make sure that I get a win. I need to avoid bad situations. That if I see that it's a darker lane or alley and I see that there's some people waiting there, I'm probably not going to walk down that way. I'll take the well-lit path. Thank you. Okay. The other thing is I want to avoid situations like if I see that someone is starting to think about some things in their past, experience some past trauma, I go ahead and try and avoid continuing that further. But what if I can't avoid it? The next thing that I need to be able to do is escape it, right? If I'm already walking down that path in either one of those scenarios, I need to be able to see, oh, I'm going that way and I need to go the other way. I need to know how to get out of those situations. Third thing is I need to be able to de-escalate. If I can't avoid it and I can't escape it, I need to know how to de-escalate that situation, especially when we talk about some of the verbal de-escalation strategies. Those can be very important and are usually precursors to the physical stuff. If you can head it off at the pass there and de-escalate it before it goes any further, that's a pretty solid win in my book. And last but not least, we have to work on this physical self-protection side of things. Because at the end of the day, you may do absolutely everything right and things still get physical and go hands-on. And in that instance, you need to be able to keep yourself physically safe so that eventually you can continue to fulfill that Hippocratic oath or whatever you've taken to continue to help others. If you're not safe, no one else can be.
Nice. So can we flesh these out a little bit? Like for avoidance, that's going to require some skills. One of those skills is going to be situational awareness.
Oh, of course.
So
absolutely.
situational awareness, everybody says you need to have situational awareness. You need to have situational awareness. No one actually says what situational awareness is. So really, situational awareness for us talks about 3 different kinds of situations. I need to be aware of my environment. What you guys probably can't see is there's a drop off on the stage here, that there are pieces of tape on where I'm supposed to stand and I don't pay any attention to it. I'm supposed to, but I don't. There are backdrops here. I need to be able to see the situation. I need to know where the exits are. Second part of situational awareness is I need to be aware of the people in my environment and my relationship to those people. I happen to know this one. I know how far he is from me. I know who he is. So I need to be aware of where people are, what their relationship is to me, what my role is in that situation as well. And last, I need to be aware of my internal situation. I need to be aware of what I'm experiencing on a moment-by-moment basis in terms of thoughts, in terms of emotions, in terms of physical sensations, because that's going to be one of my warning signs. That's going to be something that's going to tell me what's going on. And if I'm not monitoring those things, if I'm walking around on my phone, if I'm doing all these other things and not situationally aware, then I'm going to run into a lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
So what if I don't want to step out of the argument? Like what if I'm feeling good about arguing with this person? What do I have to do with my ego?
I have to learn how to divest my ego in situations like that. I need to learn how to control my, what we lovingly refer to as monkey brain, so that I can eventually de-escalate that situation internally. I need to acknowledge first off that I'm in my monkey brain. I need to know that I'm currently at a heightened state of arousal and that that's not going to benefit me. Then I need to be able to address that internally and say, hey, you're in your monkey brain. Usually I'm a lot more colorful in my language when I'm addressing myself when I'm in my monkey brain, but we'll keep that quiet for now. After that, I need to be able to just take a good diaphragmatic breath. We talk about that or we train for that. Just a good big breath in your stomach. What that should do is that shouldn't make you look super nice for dates, but it should puff your stomach out and you should get a lot of good air intake. And last but not least, I need to be able to address that and say, hey, I'm sorry, I was starting to get upset. What were we talking about?
I have to be able to break my freezes. I have to be able to be willing to use aggression to keep myself safe. So all those things are things that I've got to be able to do in order to do that. So when we started pulling together that ADAPT model, what that really stands for are a few sections that we needed to do. If I'm a healthcare professional, you have trained to do these things. And I don't care. So to my people who don't have diagnostic privileges, let's be honest, you do really diagnose people. Like you can't officially write down their diagnosis, we know, but you do. So every healthcare professional has had multiple years doing these things that we're going over here. You have had at least 1 year If not, you have had 4, 5, 6, 7 years learning how to do this piece. So let's use a model that healthcare professionals already know. The first thing I need to be able to do is accept and gather data. I need to be able to see what's going on. I need that situational awareness. I need to be able to gather that information so I can do something with it. The second thing I need to be able to do is I need to be able to make a diagnosis. That means I need to know what the different types of violence are, what the different types of violence look like, what accelerates them, what decelerates them. I need to be able to accurately and clearly diagnose this situation. Then I need to be able to assess what my options are. Meaning, what skills do I possess? What are the environmental conditions? What type of violence am I facing? What are the ramifications? I need to be able to make those kinds of assessments in that moment. Next to last, I need to be able to prescribe. I need to pick what I'm going to do out of that. That's the side part in the OODA loop that you were talking about.
Of course.
So I need to be able to make a prescription. Again, if you don't have prescription privileges in Ohio because you're a psychologist, not that I'm salty about that, still you make a prescription. And last, I need to be able to offer some treatment. I need to be able to take some kind of action. Those are the kind of things that we need to be able to do if we're being able to use this ADAPT model. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we went over a really, really brief model of this. I mean, our workshop is, we do everything from a 6 and 8 hour training at the low end, all the way through a 64-hour training. So this won't teach you how to do those things in this moment, but at least hopefully you will be able to get an idea of some of the things that you need to be able to do in order to keep yourself safe as a healthcare professional. All of these things link in together. All of these things matter. So are there things that you can think of that we're missing so far?
I don't believe so. You already covered through all of our ADAPT model, right? Accept and gather, diagnose, assess, prescribe, and treat.
Yeah. We talked about the different kinds of violence, that what makes some of them better makes others worse, that I need to be aware of what kind of violence it is, that affective violence does not look the same, isn't caused by the same things, and can't be treated by the same things as predatory violence. And predatory violence doesn't have the same origins, the same mechanisms, and the same ways of change as dopaminergic violence. And dopaminergic violence doesn't do the same things and respond in the same ways as affective violence. I need to know those things. I need to know if I'm a healthcare professional, I am the first responder, I'm the one that needs to keep myself safe. I need to know these things because, again, honestly, if I'm a healthcare professional, I'm more likely to have this happen than I am to have this happen at work.
Now, Dr. Kennedy, I do have a question for you, though. When it comes to the types of violence, one thing that I've heard fairly often is, what if there are multiple types happening at the same time? Is that a possibility?
That's a really good question. So some of the research will say you can have different kinds of violence happening at the same time, but when they look at it, it's actually a sequence of violence. It is one, I'm planning on robbing the person. The person fights back and I get hurt, and it becomes affective violence. And then, after I subdue them, I'm mad at them and I punish them. So you can have a chain of violence, but each one is a distinct type, and each one has a different cause.
So what you're saying is we really need to know what type of violence it is in order to appropriately handle it, because it can flick like a switch back and forth.
Yeah. If I don't know what the models are, if I don't have a model for it, if I don't understand what it is, then I'm really not going to be able to do anything about it.
Okay.
So that really wraps up kind of what we were talking about.
Of course, of course.
Hi,
hello,
Dr.
hello.
Kennedy and Ben, thank you so much for coming in today. That presentation was eye-opening, and we have a lot of questions in our box.
Oh, great.
So let's just jump right into the questions.
Wonderful.
All right. Okay, first question. Several providers, such as Voc Rehab, physical therapy counselors, work directly one-on-one with patients. What self-protection steps should be taken when you work alone?
Very good
That's a
question.
really good one. So there's a lot of steps we need to take in that situation. One is starting out with situational awareness. I need to know what's around me, what I'm experiencing, and watching what the other person is experiencing. I need to know what types of violence are prone in this kind of situation. If I'm working alone and the training that I've had has been kind of traditional restraint training, a lot of that has to do with multiple people. You're supposed to wait until someone else gets there. So if that's the training I've had and I'm in a context where I can't use that, I need to have some other tools in my toolbox. I also need to have articulation skills. I need to be able to describe what's going on so that that can get charted if we're talking medically, so that I can inform staff and support, so that I can inform police if that's important too. So those are really some things that I need to be able to do if I'm working alone as a healthcare professional.
That makes sense. I like that. Okay, so how about this one? Why don't more healthcare professionals receive training?
That's a really good one. So one of the things that we see fairly often in the healthcare field is due to that, that fear from administration of making sure that it's much more important to not get sued by the patients than it is by the people working underneath you. That leads to a lot, how do we put this lightly? Of oversight.
Of oversight.
A lot of oversight. And of course, following that whole Hippocratic oath that you have to take to help others and stuff like that, it's really easy to see how self-defense and taking a Hippocratic oath can sometimes seem to butt heads, but that's not necessarily the case. As long as we think about things in terms of, I am keeping myself safe so that I can continue to do my job and help others, hopefully that sort of paradigm shift will allow people to start taking more self-defense courses to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple other things too to add to
course.
that. One would be, even though we're healthcare professionals and we know intellectually that prevention is important, do prevention, do prevention, do prevention. We're also humans, and humans don't do prevention really well. We would much rather wait until there's a problem and intervene than prevent the problem. So I'm an administrator, I've got to decide what we're going to put in our budget because we've got to decide fiscal year's getting ready to come up. And I can either make sure that they have all of the defib units that they need, or I can do this thing that might do something later down the road that keeps somebody safe, maybe.
Yeah.
And so I am not going to take that preventative measure because that is a distant elephant. You know,
Sure.
if there's an elephant a quarter of a mile away, it looks tiny compared to my thumb. Now, when it gets to me, it's massive and it will stomp me into the ground. But while it's still at a distance, it looks really, really small.
Sure.
That's this training.
Okay. All right. How about this one? Why don't we hear more about this type of violence against healthcare workers?
All you.
Well, it's a part of the job. Is a big part of it. As a matter of fact, they recently passed a law in Ohio, I say recently, relatively recently, about 10 years ago, that they changed it to a felony to assault a healthcare professional. But people don't know that
No.
because A, this is a part of what they do. This is a part of their job. B, what tends to happen is those different types of violence that we talked about, they happen at different rates. So affective violence, it's about 75% of the time versus predatory only about 25% of the time. Now, those numbers could be off because they've never factored in dopaminergic violence.
That is an interesting thing,
But
and
you still
hopefully
have-
we see that soon.
But you still have a higher ratio. So that doesn't garner much attention. What garners attention is when it is that person doing predatory violence. When we think of violence, you're thinking of somebody with a pitchfork and pointy ears doing really, really bad things. That's what draws attention. When it is the patient who had a PTSD flashback and started hitting the person, and the person ended up falling and breaking their elbow, that doesn't garner attention. So those are probably some reasons why we don't hear kind of more about it.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, how about, let me find one. Oh, this is a good one. What do you do if the person being violent is a minor?
That is a very interesting point.
Yeah. So Ben mentioned earlier about ethics and about law. So really we've got three things. You have ethics. That's what I'm willing to do as a person. You have legal, what the state or the country says you're allowed to do, and you have policy. And that's what my agency says I'm allowed to do. And those things aren't necessarily in alignment. So I need to know what my ethics are. I need to know what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. And I need to be very clear on that. Am I willing to, if a patient Ben's age and size came at me with a knife and I could hit them with something really, really hard that might hurt him really badly, am I willing to do that? If Penn was a 98-year-old female, would I be willing to do it? And it's not going to sound really good to say that because we want to treat everybody like they're all the same, but really people are going to make a different judgment. They're going to make a decision. If it is a child, if it is a 15-year-old and they have a weapon, what am I willing to do? If it's a 5-year-old, what am I willing to do? So first of all, I need to clarify my ethics. I need to know very clearly that I am not going to hurt a 6-year-old, even if they have a weapon, so what do I need to do instead? Or if it's a 6-year-old and they can do lethal force to me, I am willing to hurt them. That is a gut decision for you to make that I can't answer. What I can say is you need to know what it is. From there, you need to know what kind of training you need to be able to do those things.
You also need to make sure you keep tabs on the legal and the policy side of things as well. Because once you figure out what you are willing to do ethically, then you look a little bit farther forward into some of the legal and policy side of things as well.
That makes sense. Okay, we have time for one more question, I think.
Okay.
How much training do you need?
That's a really good question. As much as you can get is the answer I should give. That having been said, we kind of looked at it, and when people haven't had any kind of training whatsoever, we think that this type of training can be effectively done in about 60 hours, 65 hours.
Okay.
That's kind of, if you went, again, from no training at all to whatever the situation is, you can handle it. Okay. We think that in about 8 hours, though, we can impart enough information that most of the situations you're in, you're going to be able to handle. So kind of there can be a general training. Now, this is not restraint training. That is a whole different, we do that, but we're not talking about restraint training.
Okay.
We're talking about keeping myself safe training. Restraint training is I have an obligation and a duty to subdue that person. And that is a different type of training. So excluding restraint training, if you're just talking general self-protection training, we would say probably about 65 hours. Does that
I would
sound-
say so, absolutely.
Okay. All right. How about this, a real quick one? 3 takeaways of your presentation for the audience, about 30 seconds.
I would hope that you guys could take away, first off, that what we're doing here is meant to help you keep yourself, your patients, and everyone around you safe. I would hope that you would take away that there are a lot more types of violence than most people talk about, and that needs to be addressed. And I would hope that you would take away that in looking at this new light on violence, hopefully your mind is open to all the other possibilities, and maybe this answers some things that you may have had questions about before.
I love that. Thank you so much.